You know that moment when someone asks you something simple, and for a second your mind just pauses. Not because you don't have anything to say, but because nothing you could say feels real enough to answer it. How are you? What did you do today? Nice weather, right? You hear it, you understand it, but something in you doesn't fully engage. It feels like you're being invited into a conversation that doesn't really go anywhere. So you respond politely, briefly, and then you start looking for a way out of it. Not because you don't like people, but because something about that kind of interaction feels empty. Most people don't notice this, and when they do, they tend to misread it. They assume it means you're awkward or uninterested, or maybe even a little difficult to talk to. Sometimes they think you're quiet because you don't have much to say. But that's not usually what's happening. It's not a lack of ability. It's a lack of resonance. There's a difference. People who don't connect with surface-level conversation are often seen in simple terms, but there's more going on here than people realize. What looks like disinterest is often something else entirely. From a psychological perspective, not everyone processes conversation the same way. For some people, talking is a way to fill space. It creates rhythm, connection, a sense of ease. The content doesn't always matter as much as the act itself. But for others, conversation is something that needs to carry meaning. Their brain isn't just listening for words, it's scanning for intention, depth, subtext. It's trying to understand what's behind what's being said, and when that layer isn't there, the interaction can feel incomplete. There's research in neuroscience that shows some people naturally engage more with deeper cognitive processing during social interaction. Their minds look for patterns, emotional signals, and underlying context. It's not something they decide to do, it's just how their attention is wired. So when a conversation stays at the surface, it doesn't activate much. It's not uncomfortable, it's just understimulating. And over time, your system learns that. It starts to associate certain types of conversation with a kind of mental disengagement. Not boredom in the obvious sense, but a quiet sense that nothing meaningful is happening. That's why you might find yourself more present in conversations that go deeper, even if they're heavier or more complex. Because your mind has something to hold on to. But this pattern doesn't just come from wiring, it's also shaped by experience. If you grew up in an environment where communication wasn't always direct, where emotions were implied more than expressed, where you had to read tone, pauses, or subtle changes in behavior to understand what was really going on, your brain adapts. It becomes skilled at reading between the lines. And when that becomes your baseline, surface-level conversation can feel like it's missing something important. Not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't match the level your mind is used to operating at. You're not just hearing words, you're listening for meaning. And when meaning isn't present, it creates a kind of disconnect. That's why it can feel easier to stay quiet than to engage in something that doesn't feel real to you. Not because you have nothing to contribute, but because what's being exchanged doesn't feel worth stepping into. And that can be misunderstood. Because from the outside, silence looks like distance. But internally, it's often just selectivity. It's choosing where your energy goes. It's important to say this clearly. There's nothing inherently better about preferring deeper conversation, and there's nothing lacking about enjoying lighter, surface-level interaction. Different people are wired to connect in different ways. Some people use conversation to create comfort, others use it to create understanding. Both are valid. Both serve a purpose. But when your system leans toward depth, it naturally filters out what doesn't meet that level, not consciously, just automatically. And that's where things get more complex. Because even though you may prefer meaningful conversation, you still live in a world where most interaction starts at the surface. Small talk isn't meaningless to everyone. For many people, it's a bridge, a way of testing safety, building familiarity, easing into something deeper over time. But if your mind skips that step, it can feel unnecessary. Or even draining. So you end up in this quiet tension. You want connection, but not that kind. You want conversation, but not that version of it. And because of that, you might find yourself engaging less often, not because you don't care, but because what's available doesn't feel aligned. There's a kind of paradox in this. The same sensitivity that allows you to connect deeply can also make it harder to connect casually. The same awareness that helps you understand people on a deeper level can make surface interaction feel less satisfying. And over time, that can create distance. Not intentional distance, just a gradual shift toward environments and people where conversation feels more real. Where you don't have to translate or simplify your way of engaging. But there's also something else underneath this. A quiet strength. When you don't rely on constant conversation to feel connected, your relationship with yourself tends to become more stable. You're able to sit in silence without needing to fill it. You don't feel the same pressure to speak just to maintain a moment. And that creates a different kind of presence. One that isn't built on performance, but on awareness. That doesn't mean it's always easy. There are moments where it might feel like you're out of sync with the way most people interact. Moments where you wonder if it would be simpler to just engage the way others do. But this isn't something that needs to be fixed. It's something that makes sense when you look at how your mind works. It means your system values depth over frequency, meaning over momentum. And that has its place. You're not broken for not connecting with conversations that don't feel real to you. You're responding exactly the way your mind has learned to. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because the goal was never to force yourself into every interaction. It was to understand why some of them feel the way they do. And once you see that clearly, something shifts. You stop interpreting your silence as a flaw. You stop assuming there's something missing. You start recognizing that your way of connecting just follows a different path. And when you find the right kind of conversation, the kind that meets you at that level, you don't struggle to engage. You don't hold back. You don't look for an exit. You're there. Fully. And if this feels familiar, there are probably other patterns in the way you relate to people that follow the same quiet logic. They don't stand out at first. But once you start noticing them, they begin to make a certain kind of sense.